Hello and welcome to Critical Readings, episode 326, for the 8th of June, 2026. I'm Dr. Sean Philip Cooper, and with me today I have Dr. Drew Nathaniel Keene.
Salutations.
And Lane Haygood.
Hello.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Well, today we are going to be looking at our second part of a 14-episode series on the Once and Future King. This will cover chapters 8 through 13. And then next week's we'll cover 14 through 19. There we go. I think I've got that right. It's 5 chapters next week and then 5 the week after that. So do stay tuned and do send us your comments as we work through this really fine work of Arthurian literature. Now, a couple things before we get started today. There are no listener comments today. Those will be next week. They're going to be every other week for the foreseeable. The other thing is you may have noticed our introductory music is either absent or has changed, and that is because we are working on getting new music. And then I've got to actually go and edit all 320 some existing podcasts to remove the old intro and outros and put new ones on. This is out of a preponderance of caution is what it's for. We don't want Spotify to incorrectly flag the music as being under copyright. It isn't. It is not under copyright. It is more than 100 years old. But people have uploaded it anyway to Spotify. And what Spotify might do is it might say, well, someone's uploaded this. That means it's copyrighted. Because companies are basically uploading out of copyright music and saying, well, now we own this recording of it. And so then if you use it, even though you're using it legitimately and you're not using their recording, they will flag it anyway. And you have to fight a costly legal battle. And I just don't want to risk having the podcast pulled. So I'm going to record our own music. And I will slap it on. And by the time you hear it on this podcast, it'll be there. And all of this will be for nothing. And you'll say, what music? It's been that way since episode 1. Because I've done it already. That's why. So this will be very confusing to you. But I just wanted to let you know, whilst it's not edited, that's why there isn't intro or outro music. We are working on new intro and outro lines. Also, you should join us as subscribers because you get access to this on Discord live, where you can watch it as it's being recorded or listen, whichever you prefer. And then there is no intro or outro music because you're getting the raw, unfiltered version as it is recorded. That's for all of our Discord subscribers. And all you have to do is become a patron by going to criticalreadings.com and clicking Become a Patron at the top of the page. You get access to that Discord channel where you can watch the podcast being recorded live and get early access to the podcast as soon as it's edited before it goes live on the site. You can also participate in chats with our other subscribers and use our message boards for discussions about the topics of literary interest. Thank you to all those who support us. Your names are in the credits. And if you're already a supporter and you haven't got a Discord link, shoot us an email at critreadings@icloud.com. All right, gentlemen. I think that's the preliminaries out of the way. It's time to turn our attention to chapters 8 through 13. And I promised last week that we would begin this week with that section about Merlin and his limitations. It's because this sequence of episodes deal with, these sequence of chapters deal with Arthur becoming rather frustrated on Kay's behalf. They get into a tiff. He's being turned into something once again. And after being turned into a Merlin and spending a night amongst the various members of the avian family in the with Cully and all of the other birds that are trained by Hob.
The Falcons.
The Falcons, yeah. Kay gets very angry. He says, where were you, basically? You know, it's so unfair because Merlin's always giving you special lessons, and I don't get anything.
It's a delightful little scene. I know you snuck out last night. Where did you go? And they end up wrestling with each other. And White makes a point of saying, in those days, no one wore any clothes to bed. So they looked like skinned rabbits rolling around on the floor.
Yeah, they're completely naked. And Kay ends up with a bloody nose, and Wart ends up with a black eye.
And after which, later in the day, they're even better than they were before.
Well, indeed, right? They get it all out of their system. And then Arthur, and this is, I think, what really makes him different than Kay. If Kay had been getting special lessons and Arthur hadn't, Kay wouldn't have cared. right? He wouldn't mind that at all. He has all sorts of special treatment that Arthur doesn't get, and it doesn't bother him at all, right? Because as White repeatedly tells us, that's because Kay is Ector's proper son, and Arthur is not Ector's proper son. And Kay rubs this in his face at every opportunity, right? It upsets, because it makes him less than Kay somehow. And yet Arthur, of course, being very good-hearted, thinks it is fundamentally unfair. Why should he get lessons that Kay doesn't? After all, Merlin is their tutor, not his tutor. And a very interesting thing, Merlin really is very evasive on this point at first. And as you said last week, Drew, he gives a bunch of vague answers.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually he's really pinned down. He gets kind of fed up. He blows himself to Bermuda and back.
Well, accidentally.
Accidentally. Castor and Pollux. Blow me to Bermuda. And he goes there.
And when he reappears, I think this is quite amusing because it says something about the nature of his magic, is that he doesn't have to be trying to use it for a spell to work. So when he comes back momentarily after having departed, the Wart says, well, why did you do that? And he said, well, I didn't do it on purpose. Let that be a lesson to you not to curse, because it's the curse that actually caused it to happen on accident.
This also reminds me of something you said last week. You said something about the nature of Merlin's magic being sort of undefined. We don't really have a clear idea of his limitations. But we get more than that because Merlin gets his power from someone or something with whom he can converse. And there's like a sort of open helpline where he can chat with these beings or being. And so here's what we have in the text. This is in chapter 9. The Wart sat quiet while Merlin closed his eyes and began to mutter to himself. Presently, a curious black cylindrical hat appeared on his head. It was a topper. Merlin examined it with a look of disgust, said bitterly, "And they call this service!" and handed it back to the air. Finally, he stood up in a passion and exclaimed, "Come here!" The Wart and Archimedes looked at each other, wondering which was meant. Archimedes had been sitting all the while on the windowsill and looking at the view, for of course he never left his master. But Merlin did not pay them any attention. "Now," said Merlin furiously, apparently to nobody, "do you think you are being very funny? Very well, then, why do you do it? That is no excuse. Naturally, I meant the one I was wearing. But wearing now, of course, you fool. I don't want a hat I was wearing in 1890. Have you no sense of time at all?" Merlin took off the sailor hat, which had just appeared, and held it out to the air for inspection. "This is an anachronism," he said severely. "That is what it is, a beastly anachronism." So he's talking to someone who is responsible, capable of delivering these things from across time to him.
And someone who seems to be in
present.
The future.
Yeah, like he can see them, right? Talk to them. Nobody else can. In the future, in the past, outside of time. So,
well, whoever it is knows what 1890 means.
Exactly.
Presumably, right. The Wart has no idea what that means.
And Archimedes and the Wart are completely confused because he's carrying on this conversation, as it says, apparently with nobody. But they're having a back and forth conversation because Merlin is responding to the things that this persons are saying.
He's bound to familiar from the lesser key.
Yeah, something like that, right? Something peculiar is going on, and I think this is interesting because it does suggest that his power isn't entirely from him, right? It's connected to stuff outside of his own immediate present reality, right? He can talk to someone or something in some other point in history, and they can assist him.
And it also doesn't seem to be like druidic earth magic. It makes me wonder if, because he moves backwards through time, if it's not just that he's conversing with someone who's at a sufficiently advanced point in history that their technology seems like magic.
Well, yeah, it could be some sort of time travel, or like the Office of Temporal Investigations, right?
Yes.
He's getting it from the TARDIS.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone is able to do this, right? Whether it's Doctor Who or uh, Skulder and Mully, whoever it is, they're able to reach him. I think
Well, I read it.
I just thought that was interesting because it could have, White could have just, you know, he didn't need to include this sequence. What does it narratively do, though, is I think it shows that Merlin he's not a god or an
No.
angel. He's not Gandalf, right? Gandalf is effectively an archangel. That's
Mhm.
not what Merlin is. He's just a man. Now, he had a good teacher, Blaise. That is from the prose Merlin, by the way. That's a real medieval thing. Like Merlin's teacher's real name was Blaise, according to the medieval versions of the Merlin. But what is White's idea? This is entirely White. This is not medieval. Is the idea that he lives backwards in time, and so he struggles to remember things that I say remember, but he struggles to remember things in the past because for him, it's sort of they haven't happened yet. However,
He
he can see
he's
the future because that's the stuff of memory for him.
he's an absent-minded Oxford Don, basically.
Yes, that's it exactly. And there's a good, it fits into the sort of modernization of the early 20th centuryization of the story to make him that way. But I think it also puts really hard limits on what he can do that make him function in a narratively interesting way. Like this is why he can't just snap his fingers and save Camelot, or just magically do all the things that could at a stroke save the realm. Instead, he has to rely on Arthur to do it. And there also seems to be a sort of divine framework in which he operates, and that we see in this chapter as well when he starts talking about I can't. It's not for me to do that. I'm not. My magic doesn't even work on Kay. He says I can't turn him into anything. It's not that I
This
don't
this
want
is
to. I can't. I can't actually do it.
this is really important for writing a narrative that has any kind of magic in it. Is that if you don't have really hard limitations on what magic can do in the narrative, then you destroy the narrative because there's no real stakes for anything. The magic can just put everything right in a flash. And then you wonder,
Right.
well, why are we doing all this stuff anyways then if we could have just fixed it that way?
There's no
Why
room for
can't they just get
humanity.
on the Eagles and fly to Mount Doom?
Right, exactly, like that.
Yeah. No, and I think we mentioned Brandon Sanderson in the last episode. He actually has an explicit point on that. That the most interesting thing about magic in a story has to be its limitations.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because you can give someone a power, but it's the limitation that creates the narrative tension.
They ran into this problem. I don't really go in for the Marvel and DC comics and all that, but I sometimes will watch a documentary or read about them. And apparently, in the mid 20th century, Superman ran into this problem because they made the character so increasingly powerful that there were no longer any stakes to the stories. It was just so they had to create something like kryptonite to limit what Superman could do. Otherwise, the stories were boring.
Yeah, you never feel that he's in any danger from anything.
Exactly.
And so I read this Merlin's limitations here is coming from White's knowledge of kind of the late 19th century, early 20th century esoteric traditions that are going on at this time. The Rosicrucians,
Yes.
Hermeticism, and things like that, where magic isn't located within the adept, within the practitioner. It's not a power that they have, it's a deal that they make with some sort of otherworldly spirit.
Yes. This
And
this is
so,
the way that
yeah,
magic is typically understood in very ancient literature too. It's always dealing with demons and spirits of some kind.
Well, I mean, it must seem that way to Archimedes and the Wart, right? When Merlin is talking to thin air, and things are appearing on its head, and he's handing them back to thin air, right? I don't know. This isn't right. And he gives it back, and it disappears. Someone has taken it. A demon, a spirit of some sort, has taken it away. It's somewhat, it's not frightening because of the incompetence of the creature, whatever it is, right? I want my hat, and you're getting an Abraham Lincoln stovepipe hat, and then you're getting a sailor's hat. Eventually,
Well, and this
he gets the
this
right one.
also, it looks so much. This particular scene looks so much like an early 20th century magic show, which would incorporate these kind of elements of comedy. It's almost a vaudeville act that we're seeing here. No, we're
And
not
then
that hat, right? But it just pops out of nowhere.
you've got to remember, if he does have a bound familiar here, the spirit is not there willingly. And so it's kind of the, be careful what you wish for from the genie type of story. The spirit is not going to be compliant. They're going to be malicious in how they're complying. And you've got to be very specific with your instructions.
And that's why
Could
Archimedes
be.
says, ask for your wizard's hat.
Yeah, Archimedes is extremely rational, and this is a good example of, because Archimedes can see, well, if the problem is that the flow of time is confusing for whoever he's talking to, then why don't we use a description that doesn't depend on time, not the hat that I was wearing, because then you have to win. Just say this particular hat, the hat that looks like this, which gets you out of the time problem.
Bertrand Russell would be very proud.
I've got an owl, I just noticed, above me, up here.
That is true.
Yeah, I've got my own
Archimedes is there in
Archimedes
frame.
looking on. But I don't have anyone to put imaginary hats on my head.
It also makes perfect sense for the owl to be ultra rational, the owl being the symbol of Athena.
That's right, right? And actually, on that point, the the solution they come up with is also a rational one, right? Merlin can't turn Kay into anything. Now, why this is, like, it has to do with the nature of Merlin turning Arthur into things. Is Merlin actually turning Arthur into a bird and actually turning him into a fish? Is that something that's really happening? Or is it something that Arthur imagines is happening?
Mm.
All right.
I don't think it would matter in the end.
Well, that's the thing. Like, because it doesn't matter, then the story can kind of present it as if it is happening. But
Yes.
I every time I read this book, and as you get nearer and nearer the end, it becomes like when he comes out of these things, no one else seems to have noticed that it's happened, right? There doesn't seem to be any effect of it. And I often wonder, is this just something that Arthur is imagining? It's like a dream, right? Or a daydream. Merlin is telling him a fable, and Arthur is imagining himself in it. And the
Well, we know
reason he
he's
can't
physically-
turn Kay into these things is because Kay lacks the imaginative capability to do that.
Well, certainly, I think White portrays Kay as lacking the imagination, but we note that Arthur the Wart is physically gone from the room he shares with Kay. So we know he's at least
Yeah.
somewhere else.
I think he
But
might
yeah,
be
I mean,
with Merlin, right? Is because he goes with, like, that's the one where he goes with Merlin, right? Merlin's with him.
Yeah.
And takes
It's
him
also
away.
interesting that the musical Camelot, that's loosely based off of this material, suggests exactly that. Arthur, as an adult thinking back, says, Merlin didn't really turn me into these things, but he made me believe that I was a bird. So they're proposing exactly what you are.
Well,
See,
if
that's always been
Merlin-
my, like, it's important that White doesn't explicitly say it, because that destroys the magic of it. But he hints at it, and we'll see this as we read it throughout the narrative. At the conclusion of these things, no time will have passed, or people won't notice that he's been gone, because he goes with the geese for months and months, right? And then he ends up back in his bed where he started, and none of it appears to have actually happened. So I suspect that that's like what we're supposed to, like, as adults, that's like the kind of this is what a child remembers or imagines. It's a sort of game for children. And that's why when Arthur gets older, he's able to look back on it and say, oh yeah, remember when,
Oh, and one other interesting bit of evidence about that, which might tilt the scales in this direction too, is the Wart doesn't perceive Merlin as being present as a falcon with him. But yet, after it's over, Merlin makes reference to the ordeal.
Exactly.
And Arthur says, "How did you know about that? You weren't there." And he refuses to tell him how he knew about it.
Because he was telling it was a story, right? It's a fable, and Arthur gets so caught up in it, and that's what makes him special. Is like he's actually able to get completely caught up and immersed in this to the point that he believes it's real, and that would never happen with Kay. He just doesn't have the ability. Like Kay would be bored. And that's like the paradox. That's Kay is really upset. You know, why can't I have a lesson like you have? But the reality is Kay would be too bored to have a lesson, right? He wouldn't be able to get into it. He wouldn't be able to imagine himself. He would just sit there looking at the ceiling, like, when is this going to end? All he's doing is telling us a story and talking. But for Arthur, that allows him to imagine himself in the scenario and actually to become the fish. For Kay, it would just be talking at him.
That really is, whatever we think about what's going on here with the transformations, that is critical for Arthur's adult project, because his project as a king is to create the kind of kingdom that has never actually existed before. He believes in it. He believes that it can exist, and he's trying to bring it into reality on the basis of his belief in it. So that powerful imagination is something that carries through the whole of these.
And if you're a king, you can do that. If you're an absolute monarch, you can believe a realm into existence, right? I mean, he defines what the realm is. He gets to choose. And if he has sufficient belief to carry people along with him, he can believe a system of government into existence. I think this is why the Kay's adventure is so unique, because they don't get turned into anything, and they have the kind of adventure that Kay can appreciate, which is about human people fighting battles, you know, doing combat, defeating witches, right? They meet Robin Hood and Marion, and they fight Morgan Le Fay. It's a Kay adventure. It's not an Arthur adventure.
It's also fascinating that in this in the segue into this next episode, it's not Merlin that figures out the solution. Just like Merlin didn't figure out the solution to the hat problem, Archimedes did. It's Arthur who says, okay, well, if you can't transform Kay into something, is there something interesting going on somewhere else right now that we can go participate in? So it's frequently not Merlin's idea that is the driving force of things in this story.
Indeed. And consider this. I mean, you might argue they actually do go and participate in this adventure with Robin Hood and Marian and Morgan Le Fay. But Robin Hood is another story, right? And maybe it's the kind of story that Kay can appreciate. So they're not off actually doing an adventure. Merlin is telling them a story, and it's the kind of story. It's a story about now. Something that's happening now, right? It's a story about real people doing real things, and that's the kind of thing that Kay can appreciate and actually get lost in. He can get lost in a story about Robin Hood, because Robin Hood's a person, and he's having the kind of adventures that people like Kay himself might have.
But you're confused. It's actually Robin Wood.
Oh yes, sorry, no, not the same person.
This is not that copyrighted character. This is something totally different.
Well, that's another question I had, is about the delightful anachronism of, because the classic Robin Hood is placed in the 12th century. I know there are earlier iterations before the 12th century, but the version of Robin Hood that most know is the 12th century one. And so again, we're left with the question of, when in time are we here? And it doesn't really matter. It's just, way back when.
Robin Hood hasn't happened yet. If you're in the 8th century, Robin Hood's 400 years in the future. So how can we have stories about Robin Hood? Well, that's White just doing his thing, right? It's a
yes.
He puts all of Arthurian history and chivalric history into a sort of blender and sets it to puree. And so you get all sorts of, anachronisms. And then, of course, the whole thing is poured into a 1938 shaped tin. So, the structure is modern. the bits and pieces. I mean, later on he'll talk about the entirely fictional kings, Richard III and Henry II, right? White says they didn't exist. Man, those are the fiction. The reality is Arthur, you know. And he reigned for 1,000 years, apparently.
That was the millennium that we've all been waiting.
So what about this? What about this adventure? I think there's some revealing things. Earlier, Wart, I think, is it in chapter 8, maybe 7? Wart is confronted about marriage. Merlin mentions it to him, and Wart says, I'm not going to get married. That's ridiculous. What a stupid idea. Then I wouldn't be able to have adventures, basically. And then just a chapter later, here in chapter 9, he sees Marion and immediately thinks, well, this is the kind of person I would fall in love with. And we have that description, and here's what it says. If I am made to get married, thought the Wart, who had doubts on the subject, I will marry a girl like this, a kind of golden vixen. As a matter of fact, though the boys did not know it, Marion could hoot like an owl by blowing into her fists, or whistle a shrill blast between tongue and teeth with the fingers in the corner of the mouth. I can't do that. Could bring all the birds to her by imitating their calls, and understand much of their same language, such as when the tits explain that a hawk is coming. Could hit the popinjay twice for 3 times of robins, and could turn cartwheels. But none of these accomplishments was necessary at the moment. Well, I mean, the Wart's ideas about marriage are developing in real time as we're reading the book. A chapter ago, he didn't want to get married. Now he's just got doubts, and he's saying, I would marry someone like this. I could marry someone who could hold her own and do the kinds of things that boys do. It reminds me of that, was it Ray Bradbury? H.G. Wells, maybe. Little Wars. Right?
H.G. Wells, yeah.
Yeah, H.G. Wells. It's got a subtitle like, for something like for exceptionally clever boys and for, the useful girls who are engaged in boys' activities is basically what it boils down to, right? The specially clever girls. And why are they specially clever? Because they like to play boys' games. And that's what little boys think, right? I have 3 little boys. That's what they think. They think that girls spend all their time talking and doing baby talk, and it's pointless and stupid. But the really no, they really do, right? And to be fair, a lot of little girls do that because that's what little girls do. But the really clever girls, those are the ones who are interested in things that boys like, right? And there's something about that here that's being captured very accurately in the Wart. He's still a little boy, and he thinks, oh, well, why can't a woman be more like a man? Right?
He's a Henry Higgins.
Exactly. Well, because Henry Higgins is a little boy. And that's what his mother tells him, right? You're like a fine pair of little boys playing with your live doll, right?
Yes.
This is like a little boy's view of the world. It's like little girls should be just like little boys, and that's what makes them interesting. And that's what the Wart thinks. Yeah, I could marry a girl if she was like a boy, right? If she was interested in these sorts of things. And then White tells us, actually, she was even more like a boy than they realized. She could do all these cool things, right? So I think that's interesting because Guinevere is absolutely not that kind of person.
Guinevere is the ultimate girly girl.
Yeah, right. She wants to be the object of courtly affection. That's what she lives for.
Well, I think it's interesting here that Marion is given much more agency and personality than she is even in Robin Hood's own tales.
Absolutely.
She's a prize to be claimed in most of the Robin Hood retellings, and here she is Robin's outlaw queen.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
She's a fighter.
Yep.
I think this is White doing something really interesting and powerful and anti-Freudian ultimately. Later on he'll revert. He'll come down against a certain kind of woman. Isn't this somewhat
similar to the Robin Hood and Miriam in Walter Scott's Ivanhoe?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And also the Marion in the Star Trek Next Generation episode where they end up in Sherwood Forest, and Vash is perfectly willing to kick butt.
Vash is my Marion of all time. Absolutely.
right? And so that's what this is. They're willing to fight, and I think that's what's interesting to Kay. Everyone, no one's passive in this. Even Dogboy and Caval get reunited. This has been a running thread for about 9 chapters now. The story about Caval and Dogboy and the guy running
The boy with the missing nose.
Yeah, exactly. He bit off his nose, and now they mock him too, right? There's this. That's another. We should have mentioned that last week, but there's an idea about how stigma is kind of passed on there that White is commenting on, right? There's a guy with no nose, and everyone abused him, and he went mad. And then one day he ran into town.
And he lives with the dogs.
Yeah, he lives with the dogs. And so he bites off another boy's nose because the boy was abusing him. And now that boy has no nose, and everyone abuses him, right? So he becomes kind of the thing itself. He becomes the object of his scorn, but also the thing that he was mocking, and also the thing that is mocked.
Yeah, this is the cycle of abuse, which again is one of the insights of psychoanalysis, that abuse produces these generational cycles.
Well, shall we look at a sequence here? Because I wanted to talk about Morgan Le Fay.
Oh, we must talk about Morgan Le Fay. She's that sort of antagonist of this little adventure, and there's a question about who she is. I love that little discussion they have.
Well, shall we go there? Where is that, Drew? I can't remember. Is that?
I can't recall which chapter it is.
I think it's 11.
Chapter 11. Okay, I am there. Morgan. Matter of fact, Marion. This is Marion. Oh, there's a reference here to Mandeville that I missed. I should have mentioned that. John Mandeville is there's a book here. Neither of the boys had read the book of Sir John de Mandeville, nor did they know that a griffin was 8 times larger. Blah blah blah. So it's John Mandeville, listeners, is a very famous medieval travel narrative. Well, I mean, purportedly a travel narrative. It's probably not a travel narrative. And everyone had read it in the medieval era, and quite a few people disputed it. It wasn't universally taken. Some people said it was a book full of lies, but that's what it is. It's a purported book by a man named John Mandeville, which is actually bits and pieces of biographies of priests and stuff that have been written down. They've all been cobbled together into a sort of grand narrative by this knight John Mandeville.
So he's the medieval Herodotus?
Sort of. Like a fake medieval Marco Polo, right? And he gets to go and see all the things that Herodotus said exist but don't exist.
Yeah, so, fake travel logs have been one of the most popular genres of literature.
We need to bring them back. It's hard today because, of course, everyone can travel, but bring back the fake travel narrative.
Gulliver's Travels being another good example.
We mocked the Wheel of Time in the last episode, but there is a fake travelogue that is the most widely read book within the Wheel of Time itself. So anytime someone is in a library, they look around and, it's the travels of Jane Farstrider. And then as people travel through the world, they're like, well, this guy was just lying about everything.
That's marvelous.
So here's I think this is the part you mentioned, Drew, but it's near the end of chapter 11. And she's laying on her bed. I think this is it. And I should point out that her castle is disgusting, right? It's made of food. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's really made of food. Not like a nice gingerbread house. But
it's a pork house.
yeah, literally. Like they have a drawbridge made of butter with the cow hair still in it. And it's not idealized. If you try to walk over a drawbridge made of butter, what happens? Well, you sink into it to the ankle, like wading across. The soldiers are made of cheese. Smooth, soft, mushy cheese. It's awful. You can imagine the stench, right? And that's what it says. The place smelt like a grocer's, a butcher's, a dairy, and a fishmonger's rolled into one. It was horrible beyond belief. And why had she done this? To tempt them. The whole thing is meant as a temptation. But it's so out of scale with, human desire. It's so beyond, so gross in like the sense of large, that it's disgusting, right? Horrible beyond belief. In the end, they came to the inner chamber where Morgan Le Fay herself lay stretched upon her bed of glorious lard. She was a fat, dowdy, middle-aged woman with black hair and a slight mustache. But she was made of human flesh, When she saw the knives, she kept her eyes shut, as if she were in a trance. Perhaps when she was outside this very strange castle, or when she was not doing that kind of magic to tempt the appetite, she was able to assume more beautiful forms. The prisoners were tied to pillars of marvelous pork. And they've got iron weapons, right? Which is painful to witches. So they bring them again to her and touch her with the iron, and she writhes in her lard like a slug.
This is just ridiculous.
Right? And then what happens? Well, the castle begins to collapse. And it eventually disappears, but it does leave behind the smell of spoiled milk, which is rather unpleasant. So this isn't the description of where she's from, but I think it's interesting, right? Because the spell is being carried on by trance. She can't open her eyes. They don't know if Morgan is the queen of these creatures, or if she's one of their ancient queens called Circe used to turn the one she captured into hogs. So they connect her to Circe, right?
Absolutely. Well, and it's so obvious. This is a Circean. It's Circe transformed into, something disgusting. But there's something Freudian about that too. The libidinal excess that just tilts into the disgusting.
But there's also the fairy realm, right? That's the other thing, because Morgan is connected to the idea of fairy, and we get this explicitly mentioned at the beginning of chapter 12. Morgan Le Fay, although in her fairy shape she could not stand iron, still had the griffin, right? So they got to deal with her griffin. So she's a fairy.
Well, yeah. So that was the passage I was talking about, is where they're discussing about who exactly she is, and there was they weren't all agreed that she was a fairy, and one of them says, "Well, some say that she's the daughter of the Duke of Cornwall, but let's not talk about that."
Well, and of course, what does this represent? This represents the manuscript tradition.
Right.
You know, the character of Morgan isn't. There's no one clear. When you get to Mallory, you could say Mallory kind of settles it and says, "Okay, here she is. She's married to King Lot," but at the same time, it's not entirely clear in the tradition who she is or what she is. The character changes depending on which version you're reading. So that's what I think White is doing here.
And is she Arthur's half sister? Does Arthur have sex with her? I mean, all of these kinds of things are in the background of that.
So they go after the Griffin. Wart speaks in gibberish a good deal of the time. Dog Boy is liberated, and they blow the horn, and we get to hear the horn talking, even at the beginning of chapter 12. So there's a lot of onomatopoeia in this chapter, which I think is kind of interesting as well. And then at the end, they do get the Griffin. And they also all say goodbye, too. This is a thing White does really well, is dialogue. He really likes back and forth, the sort of pleasant chatter of back and forth dialogue. And we see it between Grummore and Pellinor, right? When Pellinor gets accused of cheating for saying Pax Non.
Yes.
You're a cheat. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. You are. You said Pax. I said Pax Non. They just go pages of this back and forth brief dialogue. And I think White really loves this. And probably there's something quintessentially English about it, right? About just civil conversation, what it looks like, and what back and forth dialogue looks like. And he captures it when Pellinor and Grummore are introducing themselves. He keeps shaking hands, right?
Yes.
Hail.
Yes, exactly. Hail. He's not going to shake hands with anyone else anymore.
We're going to have to presume that I know you at this point.
It's very Monty Python.
Yes.
It reminds me, do you know the sketch they do, the argument clinic?
Yes.
Wait, you've come in here for an argument. No, I haven't. Yes, you have. No, I haven't.
So you're getting it right now, right? That's basically the idea.
Well, look, this isn't an argument. You can't just gainsay whatever I say. Yes, I can. No, you can't. Yes, I can.
Well, they all say goodbye. And then, of course, they go back and they see Sir Ector. And we get a reference, again, to another critical reading. We get a reference to John Skelton. Alas, the poor Philip Sparrow, cried the nurse. Pity his poor arm all to brast in a green sling. God bless us. Right, Philip Sparrow, of course, famous poem by John Skelton, probably the most famous poem by John Skelton. So I think this is quite interesting. We have all these literary allusions that you'd miss, right, that are brought in. Many of them are medieval literary allusions. John Mandeville, Philip Sparrow. I think that's quite clever on the part of White. But all to a purpose, which is that this is Kay's fine adventure, and it leads him being fated. You know, Kay's first griffin, little ivory card, right? And he gets
to take the head home, right?
Yeah, exactly. And he gets kind of wounded in action, which is another honorable thing, right? And then at the end, what happens to Watt and Dogboy and Cavall? Well, we get this. What have you done with this is what Wart wants to know. What have you done with the old man with no nose? He has cured him, said Kay. Well, said Merlin, you might call it that, and then again you might not. Of course, when one has lived in the world as long as I have, and backwards at that, one does learn to know a thing or two about pathology. The wonders of analytical psychology and plastic surgery are, I am afraid, to this generation but a closed book. I say, well, what did you do to him? Oh, I just psychoanalyzed him, replied the magician grandly. That, and, of course, I sewed on a new nose on both of them. So what did he do? Well, he gave them pig noses, because they had pigs that they were going to have for supper, and he gives them pig noses. But I think it's the psychoanalysis that's most revealing, right? Again, this is written in the 1930s, and so it's a product of its time. But that's the solution, is psychoanalysis will cure Dogboy and fix them right up. And the Dogboy says that the old man was good to him while they were prisoners of the Fairy Queen, that he knows he ought not to have thrown stones at him in the first place. He says he often thought about that when other boys were throwing stones at him. So we can now close this sort of running thread about the cycle of violence, and that the lesson is learned, right? Dogboy threw stones at the old man, old Watt, and in the end ended up having stones thrown at him, but they all get repaired, and on the morrow, Watt and the Dogboy were the firmest of friends. Their common experiences of being stoned by the mob and then tied to columns of pork by Morgan Le Fay served as a bond and a topic of reminiscence as they lay among the dogs at night for the rest of their lives.
They're permanently trauma bonded now.
And they pull off the pig noses.
Yeah, they don't like them.
Yeah, they got used to not having noses. So the pig noses, while a nice feature, it's the psychoanalysis that remains, and it's psychoanalysis that allows them to move beyond their trauma.
The pig noses is also an interesting, I'm not quite sure what to do with it, but an interesting allusion back to Circe, because in some tellings of the Circe myth, it's that she turns all of the men into pigs, specifically, not all animals, but pigs specifically. And Plutarch has a dialogue with one of the crew of Odysseus who refused to go back. He wanted to remain pig. Life was better as a pig.
And of course, in our modern medicine, we do use pig parts.
Exactly. They're close to humans, aren't they? Apparently.
Yes.
And of course, in Animal Farm, the pigs become humans.
Man to pig and pig to man.
Yeah, you can't tell them apart. They look the same.
So pig hearts can sometimes be used for a transplant when a human heart's not available.
Well, you might want to be a pig, but you wouldn't want to be an ant, as we discover in chapter 13. I think it's probably my favorite animal episode, if indeed he is being turned into an animal and it's not just a story, right?
You weren't quite taken with the racist military falcons?
I do like the racist military falcons because, again, they capture a sort of a sense of British military culture.
I assume that was White just taking the piss out of British military culture of that entire episode.
I think there really
absolutely.
is. But but that is less applicable because of its kind of temporal nature. But the ants, I think, are really useful. And from the first time I read this, it's been kind of like etched in my mind. I've never forgotten the ants and the mammy, 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 and the fruity voice in the head, and everything not forbidden is compulsory, and also the difference, good and bad are reduced to done and not done. It's perfect. It's these animal fables at their best. Whereas I think something like the goose episode, although it's too sentimental and too extended. So, and the military bird's a little too locked into its temporal, occasion of it being written. But chapter 13 is perennial.
Oh, I don't know. I think that the military culture of the Falcons is
You
still
think
very
so?
much with us. Oh,
I think
absolutely.
it's applicable to our strange love world.
Indeed. Well, no, there's a whole inner culture of military that is kind of insular in that way.
Well, let's look at 13. He's got this ant colony, basically, and there's an opposite ant colony. And what Merlin does, basically, is he puts a little stick to bridge them. And then he puts Wart into the ant colony with the stick across it. The place where he was seemed like a great field of boulders with a flattened fortress at one end of it between the glass plates. These are literal ant colonies. Now, people in the medieval era did not have ant colonies in glass plates. This is a very 19th/20th century thing, where you put ants between little glass plates and there's sand in it, and the ants will, you would hope, I guess, build an ant colony. I had an ant colony thing when I was a kid, and I could never get them to do it. The ants just crawled out and got into my room, so that's not helpful. But anyway,
Well, rightly so. It's kind of cruel to trap them like that, but
well, they're
that
pretty
aside.
horrid, as we discover. So don't feel bad at all. The fortress was entered by tunnels in the rock, and over the entrance to each tunnel there was a notice which said, and this is in all caps, "Everything not forbidden is compulsory." He read the notice with dislike, though he did not understand its meaning. He thought to himself, "I will explore a little before going in." For some reason, the notice gave him a reluctance to go, making the rough tunnel look sinister. So let's talk about the motto. Everything not forbidden is compulsory.
It's basically Arbeit macht frei.
Yeah, work makes you free, right? And it's put over the entrance, just like work makes you free is put over the entrance to Auschwitz. It's not a death camp, but it's a death society. That's where he's going, right?
Yeah, it's very much the Freudian death drive.
Yes,
Thanatos in
exactly.
action.
Once again, right? Another Freudian, reification right here.
Yep.
But I think, so when I first read this, I struggled with it because, I was a teenager and I hadn't read Freud. And I hadn't read the rest of the story of the ants yet. And I thought, well, that doesn't make sense. It's kind of nonsensical statement, right? Everything you can't do, you must do. Well, there are a very finite number of, it's a large number, but it's finite number of things you can't do. But the rest of the things you can do, are enormous. You can't do all of them. They're contradictory. So how can they be compulsory? But this makes sense only when you are a human being, right? If you're an ant and you have a very limited set of things that you can do, as we find out, it's extremely limited. You can't even, he can't even think in human terms when he's in an ant form. The ability, the mandating of them means that there is no room for the self, right? There is no individuality. It is absolute collectivism. It is the Borg, right? That is what it is.
It's essentially it's a kind of fable of Taylorism. Taylorism, which gets picked up by Ford, is the idea of the factory in which there are no skilled craftsman. Every human being is one cog in a large machine. And in fact, you don't want to give any one participant the kind of task that would give them agency. You want to give them a mindless, repetitive task so that no one asserts any individuality, so that it can produce as fast as possible. So it turns groups of people into a single organic machine.
And you see that in the text where they refer to the ants only by numbers and designations, and they're moving them around like, you're now on the soup squad. Someone else fell off the nest. Doesn't matter if you know how to make soup. You're making soup today.
You're now 3 of
Yeah.
soup. Exactly. Right?
Yeah.
You're 5 of combat. That's it. Well, thinking about them as the Borg is helpful because the Borg don't have autonomy. They have function. Each member of the collective is given a function. And that's what it means. Everything not forbidden is compulsory. You're forbidden to do anything but the function. And the function is compulsory. You don't get to decide about it. You don't even get to think about it. You don't get to judge its moral valence or its usefulness. You just get to do it. And whether or not you do it is the only standard by which things are judged. And that's why he can only think of things in terms of done and not done. Done is good. You must do the thing, right? Not done is bad. It means you're not fulfilling your function. So
and you've got to look at this in terms of both Hitler and Stalin and the world that they're envisioning, this very mechanistic, everything for the state type of world. Versus England and the rest of the Allies, where it's kind of like you have to remember they're fighting for the basic humanity, the freedom to do what you would do, not what the state would have you do.
It's Anglo-American liberalism saw Soviet Russia in terms of Taylorism. And White didn't have firsthand experience of Soviet Russia any more than Orwell did. But both White and Orwell are depicting the Soviet Union as if it's just a Taylorist factory. I mean, the irony is that it isn't the Soviet program so much as it is the factory program. Now, it is certainly true that the Soviet Union had to adopt heavy industry and use the Taylorist model to do that rapid industrialization, so that there was an element of Taylorism in the Soviet Union. But it's really specifically them projecting their fear of the factory culture onto the large state scale.
And kind of interesting, like you said, that factory culture comes from the quintessential American Henry Ford.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly.
Well,
and Ford also, who was himself a great admirer of Hitler, but both Hitler and Ford thought that the masses needed to be like a machine, but that there were certain kind of men who needed to be above them, who by nature were great men. And of course, that includes Ford and Hitler in their own estimation.
Of course.
Everybody else needs to be a factory. The rest of us, the great men, can be the individuals.
Well, how do you get the people on board? Well, you do it by simplifying culture down to sort of a lowest common denominator, and you make it ever present, right? And you see this in the culture industry, right? But here, the music had a monotonous rhythm like a pulse, and the words which went with it were about June, moon, noon, spoon, or mammy, 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 or ever, never, or blue, true, you. He liked them at first, especially the ones about love, dove, above, until he found that they did not vary. As soon as they had been finished once, they were begun again. After an hour or two, they began to make him feel sick inside. And then there's a mention of the voice, replacing things. Like, so-and-so has fallen off the nest, go to the soup squad. It was a fruity voice, but it seemed to be somehow impersonal, as if its charm were an accomplishment that had been practiced, like a circus trick. It was dead. And so I think about both of these things, right? Like the music is fake. It has the outward trappings of music, which is that, it's got a sort of pleasant tone to it, and the words rhyme, and they're about, sort of concepts that seem interesting, love and June, but the rhymes are really simplistic and it's really repetitive. It goes on over and over and over and over again. And White could just as easily be talking about like the radio, right? And what
Pop
gets
music.
played on it. Pop music, right? Just we're going to play the same 6 top, 10 songs on a loop today. And the lyrics are, mindless beyond belief. Just
which is to say, this is what um, commercialism does to art. We have here something that has a vague resemblance to art when you first look at it, but then you realize, oh no, this is art being turned into a factory product,
Yes, right.
and that's not art.
And that means it has to be. Well, that's exactly the point of the culture industry. If you read it, right, it's this factory
Yep.
production of culture, the mass production of culture.
Exactly. Yes.
And then the same thing happens with the voice, right? What is the most useful voice for placating the masses? So it's completely devoid of sincerity, right? The voice isn't pleasant because it's being spoken by someone who is pleasant. In fact, the person who's speaking it wants to dominate and control and placate, right? And so
It's Alexa.
Well, yeah, it is. It is that's a good thing, right? It's been focus tested to be the most pleasant, soothing voice, and that's why it exists. And so it is dead. I think if White had seen, Alexa and other ones that I won't name because they'll turn on, then he would say these are dead because they're not human beings at all. Like this is even worse. At least the voice in the ant colony is an ant, right? It's a fruity ant who wants to dominate and control, but it's actually there's an ant there. But for us, the voice doesn't even have a human behind it, right?
Well, then I read that as, reminding me of AI generated music or cultural products or things like that, because there's nothing original, there's nothing sui generis about it. It's just a computer looked at a probability of things to put together, and so it developed the rhymes based on, oh well, there are lots of songs that follow this rhyme scheme and rhyme these words with that one, so now I can do that too, and I can spit out a quote unquote new song, a product that has no creativity, no human genius behind it at all.
Well, it does.
Yes.
It's just it's stolen it, right?
That's exactly right. You had said before there's no human behind it, but in fact there is a human behind it. There's human labor that is being expropriated by another human being who controls the mechanism that's stealing the artistic production.
Exactly.
And so there is at the end of the line a person who is exploiting other people, and this is to tie it into another piece of literature that reflects on this. In all of the AI discourse right now, you sometimes will hear people talk about the Butlerian jihad, but very often they're missing what Frank Herbert was describing, not a world in which the machines become sentient and enslave us all. He says that men who owned machines enslaved other men. So the thinking machines are a product of an owner class who used their product to enslave other people. So there is agency behind it. It's just that it's hidden behind a curtain like Oz.
Well, what happens when you try to get outside of it, though, right? And I think this is a useful critique for our own time and applies directly. When Wart encounters another ant, the ant asks him what he's doing. And this is what happens. It said, "Hail, Barbarous!" Again, hail. "What are you doing?" The boy answered truthfully, I am not doing anything. It was baffled by this for several seconds, as you would be if Einstein had told you his latest ideas about space. Then it extended the 12 joints of its aerial and spoke past him into the blue. It said, 105978-UDC reporting from Square 5. There is an insane ant on Square 5. Over to you. The idea that you wouldn't be doing anything, you wouldn't be participating in this, is insane. They cannot, it's outside. Now, White reminds us the word it used for insane was not done. Later on, Wart discovered that there were only two qualifications in the language, done and not done, which applied to all questions of value. If the seeds which the collectors found were sweet, they were done seeds. If somebody had doctored them with corrosive sublimate, they would have been not done seeds, and that was that. Even the moons, mammies, doves, etc. in the broadcast were completely described when they were stated to be done ones. Now, he's very sarcastic with this ant because he doesn't like it. He doesn't like the ants already, and the more this goes on, the less he likes it. He's got the obnoxious voice that makes him feel sick, and the stupid music, and the inability to even think in human terms. And now he's got the ant, and he responds to the ant in sarcasm, and the ant can't figure it out because it has no way of understanding sarcasm. That's beyond it. He says that he fell off the nest and hit his head, and that's why he can't remember what's going on. And the ant reports this perfectly blithely, and they all accept it, right? And they tell him to get back to work, basically. But a page earlier, this is what the Wart would like to have done. He felt like asking why it did not think things out in advance. This is because the ant is carrying a cadaver, and it doesn't know how to deal with him and the cadaver at the same time. It can't negotiate doing two things at once. It says it's like a man with a teacup in one hand and a sandwich in the other who wants to light a cigarette with a match. The man would invent the idea of putting down the cup and sandwich before picking up the cigarette and the match. But this ant basically does things at random. It puts things down and picks them up, and it just until it happens on the right thing, right? It can't actually think through logically.
Well, this is essential for the philosophy of Taylorism, is that none of the human participants in the factory machine is to have any agency at
And
all.
no process
In fact,
thinking is necessary, right?
you want to give them the most dehumanizing, seemingly random tasks, breaking down the process so small, so minutely that they can't see how the one thing they do contributes to the whole. Because if they could see the whole system, then they might get ideas. You want it to be a mindless, repetitive, tiny task, and just one thing that they do over and over again.
Push the
Felt
button,
like
make the
asking
widget.
why it did not think things out in advance. The annoyed feeling which people have on seeing a job being badly done. Later, he began to wish that he could put several other questions, such as, do you like being a sexton? Or are you a slave? Or even, are you happy? The extraordinary thing was that he could not ask these questions. In order to ask them, he would have had to put them into ant language through his antennae, and he now discovered with a helpless feeling that there were no words for the things he wanted to say. There were no words for happiness, for freedom, for liking, nor were there any words for their opposites. He felt like a dumb man trying to shout fire. The nearest he could get to right and wrong, even, was to say done and not done. Now, all of this is terrible enough. But then, an ant from the other colony comes across the little straw into his colony, and they promptly murder it. And the music changes. And no longer is it mammy, 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 mammy. Now it's Antland overall. Antland über alles, right? And they're singing songs like, when other blood spurts from the knife, then everything is fine. And then they have new broadcasts. We are so numerous that we are starving. Therefore, we must encourage still larger families so as to become yet more numerous and starving. Now, if your ants can't think through things, you end up with the conclusion, when we are so numerous and starving as all that, obviously we shall have a right to take other people's stores of seeds. Besides, we shall by then have a numerous and starving army. Right? So the ants don't have process thinking. They can't understand or even articulate the idea that, you should do things in a specific order, or A leads to B leads to C. And because of that, the broadcast can simply give them any number of conclusions and they just accept them. There's no ability to reason through them or to think through them at all. In other words, the state can simply offer any justification whatsoever for its actions and they all accept it unthinkingly.
Yeah, I think that very much anticipates 1984 and even Huxley's A Brave New World. I think they both owe a debt to this description here, because it follows that same thing. The same thing with Newspeak. Let's give them a language which cannot encapsulate free thought. And the factory model of society, that's Huxley to a T, a Model T.
Well, there is another predecessor to all of these, and the use of numbers instead of names is also quite similar in this, and it's the Russian novel We, which is by, I'll probably mispronounce his name, Zamyatin, Soviet novelist, published in 24, which
1924.
Yeah, 1924, which many people have pointed out that a lot of Orwell's 1984 is quietly appropriated from this novel.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that this was also an inspiration for what White is doing here.
Indeed.
But the thing that seems to be missing is the idea that these atomized parts of the machine could possibly break out of their system. The idea that they could acquire a class consciousness and rebel seems to not be on the radar at all. But in fact, this has happened over and over again where Taylorism has been implemented. It only works for a time because you really can't permanently dehumanize the humans.
Well, I mean, you couldn't, but technology makes these
Well, it's not to
things.
say that the capitalists don't keep trying, but it only ever works for a time before the people rise up and smash the machine.
So Gene Wolfe has a good episode in his book of the New Sun, where one of the characters comes from a totalitarian society where no one is allowed to speak in anything but officially approved phrases, very much, Damrock and Jalad at Tangara style.
Yeah.
And so during a storytelling contest, as the characters are recovering in a military hospital, this person starts telling this story of his life in this totalitarian state, and someone is able to translate through them. And so Wolfe's thesis there is that try to suppress the human spirit however you can, it will always find a way around it. And I can even tell a story using nothing more than repeated official phrases, because the underlying ideas are things that you can never get rid of. Like, humans are still going to be conscious, humans are still going to have some degree of free thought. Even if you don't give them the means to express it, they will find a way to do so.
Right. Well, and exactly. And Taylorism to work required state violence. I mean, the triangle, for example, in the only reason that you have police locking workers in is because workers aren't simply taking it. Their humanity does resist this. So Taylorism needs state violence in order to do what the psychology alone isn't able to do. The dream of Taylorism is that we can achieve it through psychology. We can sort of train the human out of them, and it doesn't work. You need violence to suppress it.
Well, I think you see that implied in this chapter too, right? It's what happens when the ant encounters Wart. He immediately radios back to headquarters, right? Say something's going on here. This ant is insane. To decide whether or not force might be necessary to bring him into line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And luckily for the Wart, they don't understand that he's being sarcastic when he says he fell and bumped his head. So they're like, oh, that's fine. Just tell him to go back to work. And so, he He doesn't, though. He marches off in the opposite direction, showing he's still unwilling to bow to this. At the very end of the chapter, when he's rescued at the last minute from the ants, they've even roped religion in to control, right? They replaced the religious services with patriotic songs. I vow to
Right.
thee my smell, and so on and so forth. Everything gets, the entire machinery of the state gets mobilized to war from the top down, including the religious angle. But that's where we have to stop. Now, next week, 5 more chapters, and we will have your reader comments in episode 327. So please do send them in. We will be reading comments on chapters 1 through 13. So we really appreciate you doing so. Thank you to all those who support us. Remember that supporting us keeps all of our podcasts completely ad-free and online for absolutely everyone on our website and on our distribution services like Apple and Spotify and so on and so forth. And also those who support us get access to our Discord chat, where you can watch this podcast being streamed live as it is being recorded and listen to it as well. And you also get early access to our podcasts, and you get access to our message board forums and our chat rooms to talk to other subscribers. Thank you to all those who support us. We will put your names in the credit for as long as you're a supporter. Thank you also to my co-hosts this week. They were Dr. Drew Nathaniel Keene.
It's been a pleasure.
And Lane Haygood.
Goodbye, as always.
That's it for us. We'll be back next week with chapters 14 through 19 of The Once and Future King. Until then, from all of us here at Critical Readings, Godspeed.